Hello and welcome to Interfaith Insights, the spotlight on faith, where we focus on the positive role that music can have in our lives and how many artists are using it to make a difference. And my very special guest today learned to play cello at the age of 9, thanks to, I'm told, a very bossy mother, but she might tell us more about that later. And she went on to become a professional cellist. She's played some of the greatest works of music with some of the greatest modern orchestras around the world, from America to Japan. She graduated from Music for Healing and Transition program to become a certified music practitioner, and we'll learn more about what that means. And Claire talks about the effective use of the arts for people living with dementia through music, and can provide comfort and reduce agitation, not only for people living with dementia, but for everyone, how it can generate connections and equality among all those who are present. Claire is currently managing a fantastic new programme for the Edinburgh Interfaith Association, which is Time to Talk, providing a listening service for care home residents and their families suffering as a consequence of COVID-19. And today we'll explore more about the music and the life of Claire Garabedian. So welcome, Claire. It's wonderful to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, Iain.
Now, what I'm going to ask you, first of all, is just to take me back to when you first started playing the cello, because at age 9 is quite a young age, I would imagine, to start that. I was reading that you had a very pushy mum. I don't know if she was a musician herself or it was just an interest that she had. Can you maybe tell us more about that?
Yes. Okay, so I grew up a little differently than maybe most of your listeners. I grew up in Venice, California in the 60s. So I was on the Pacific Ocean. My father was an artist. It was a very poor area at that point. It's not anymore. Now it's one of the most expensive parts of the US to live, I think. But then it wasn't at all. And we were quite wild kids. We didn't have much in the way of boundaries and discipline. We were out at the ocean swimming and wreaking havoc around. And
sounds great.
I came from pardon?
It sounds great. It sounds idyllic.
It was great. In a lot of ways, there were good things about it. I'm very grateful in many ways. And my mom she was not musical herself, but her father, my grandfather, was a trumpet player, and met my grandmother as a trumpet player, which is really unusual. That's like in 1920s, I guess.
Wow.
She played the trumpet because, ironically and sadly, because she had asthma. And in those days, someone with bad asthma, it was what eventually killed her. It's a very difficult disease in the best of times, and back then it was really tough. So some doctor told her suggested she play the trumpet because it would be good for her lungs. Wow. So there was this very diminutive, quite frail in many ways, woman playing the trumpet. She had to have been the only trumpet player who was female, certainly in that group and probably in most groups. Wow. So they got together, and my grandfather came from a family that they were all musical. Right. All the 3 brothers and their parents. My great-grandmother played double bass, which is pretty wonderful too.
Wow.
And so there was music in the background for my mother, for sure. And so when I was a kid, I grew up listening to a lot of music. I listened to a lot of classical music and hated it. And it's one of the questions I often ask people now is, what types of music did you hate as a kid that you now like? Because it's an interesting way to talk about how we change as we grow up. But I broke my leg when I was 9 because I used to climb up sides of buildings. It wasn't health and safety orientated back then. I broke my leg climbing up the side of a building because we used to just, as I said, we were pretty wild kids. And I went to a very rough, what you guys would call a state school. And so they said, the teachers at the school said, look, you're going to have this cast on for a long time. It was October, I think. So it was right after school had started there. You should go to a different school where it's a little less rough. well, you've got this cast on. That's how rough it was there. So
Right.
I was disappointed, but my mom, I think, was quite overjoyed actually. And she got to take me to another state school, but one that was in a much posher area, and Brentwood, which is the land of O.J. Simpson and other lovely people. So
Mm,
much posher, which the only way she got me to do it was that she said they had a music program.
right.
Because only, it was only in the state schools at that point. Well, I'm sure if you paid to go to school, you got music programs, but not in the state schools. So
Okay.
this was pretty special that there was a music program. So I said, yes, I'll go. And I want to play, of course, the trumpet. And I said, I want to play the trumpet. And this was October, all the trumpets were gone. Obviously, that's like one of the popular, all the boys had taken the trumpets, and the only thing that was open was I remember the teacher very clearly saying, well, what we've got is cello and violin. Now, that was odd because I'm sure there was viola and maybe even French horn or something else may have been
Mm,
available too, but
mm,
she just said violin and cello. I had no idea what either one was. I didn't know if you
right.
hit them or blew into them or what they were. I didn't know. And it's one of my few really clear memories is going home kind of dejected and saying,
Mm,
I can't play the trumpet. There's only violin and cello. And her thinking for a minute and saying, start the cello because the violin's very screechy when you first start. So I said, okay, I get this cello. And I'm so grateful for that moment because the cello, I don't know how I would have gotten on with the violin. I mean, it's a great instrument, the
mm,
violin,
mm.
but the cello is big and I was this scrawny little kid. I was quite small. And the cello was some, who knows, some very beaten up instrument. And it was as big as me,
Yeah.
and I liked that it was so physical. And I
Right.
still do. I think it's definitely
Mm,
one of the things that I enjoy is the physicalness of playing. So that's how I started. And my mom was certainly the force behind all of our lives in terms
mm,
of me, my sister. My father was an artist and he grew up as an orphan. He would have never become successful as an artist without her behind. So yes, we had the customary, and I think you have to have with your parent arguments about practicing and whose will is going to win out kind of thing. But I tell parents that I teach now that if they're not having those arguments with their kids, and if the kids, and I tell the kids this too, if their moms aren't yelling at them to practice, there's something terribly wrong going on.
mm. And was it a natural thing for you? Did you have that instant
I took
connection?
to it totally. I just took to the cello. I had no idea. I wasn't
Uh,
competitive. I wasn't. I liked it. I thought it was fun. There were a lot of students because remember this was in a posher area that had
mm,
private lessons and had them for a long time. I got to have private lessons. I had a great teacher, Rita Toss, who I thought was ancient. She might have been all of 60. She had gray hair and everything. And so she was a great first teacher and I was very lucky to have her. And I didn't realize that it was unusual that I memorized my lessons. Nothing, like I just kind of plowed forward. I liked it and it came quite naturally to me.
but
Um,
yeah, it's interesting that I'm just thinking as you're talking here, um, like growing up, you had that kind of eclectic taste. Then I remember myself when I first went to for singing lessons, and I thought, I want to be a kind of rock singer or pop singer, and a woman was forcing me all the time to sing opera, and I was like, what's this all about, So I don't know what it was like
I
for you.
hated opera as a kid and now I love it. I should just say here
Yeah,
that, I grew up kind of listening to quite a bit of classical music and then 20s jazz because that's what my dad really
yeah,
liked.
yeah, I can imagine with the trumpets and all that. When you
Yeah,
were
yeah.
talking, I was thinking there probably was a big jazz.
There was from my dad who had been a drummer a little bit. I mean, he was,
Ah,
but but I really I'm only a classical musician. I mean, I had never, and I wasn't terribly familiar with other types of music. So for me, that's not been as much of a conflict. And in fact, it's only in my more recent years, I'm right now taking a very intensive music, cello, specifically cello improvisation course and doing all that pentatonic and
mm,
all those, all the jazz chord stuff and all that I'm doing now at the age of 59. So there you
it's great.
go.
It's great.
Better late than never. But so yeah, so that wasn't a problem so much for me. That wasn't the conflict in terms of the classical versus other types didn't have a problem for
That
me.
was just natural and flowed.
Yeah.
And what about were there musical inspirations for you then growing up?
That's easy for me. When I was, I started in it was probably 1970-ish when I started the cello. Jacqueline Dupre was, yes, she was across the pond. She was all the way over in what at that time was, billions of miles away in England. But he was a very important role model. And you'll find that there's a lot more female cellists, probably my age and, younger than there were people older than me, because she was a terrific role model as a female playing the cello. It was a much more male instrument before that, with some exceptions, of course. And then Papa Casals, he was also, this amazing cellist. He was still alive, but at the very end of his life when I was starting, he was a great inspiration to all of us. Well, he is a great inspiration to all cellists, and so is Jacqueline Dupre. We're very lucky in that way.
So did you have that feeling that this was maybe something that you were going to pursue in your life?
I'm always amazed when people talk. I have for my entire adult life asked people, so how did you get, to where you are in your jobs, especially if they're doing things like, when I found out there were things called epidemiologists, these scientists and stuff. I thought, how did you, because I always just was going to be a cellist, and it wasn't like a big deep thing. It was just sort of like, that's what I did. And I didn't even know about these other, I think it's baffling still to me that people grow up thinking they want to be, like I said to my friend Nick, I was an epidemiologist. I can hardly say it, let alone think that that's something I'd want to be. And I certainly can't spell it even to this day. So,
It's amazing. But, it's a blessing at the same time, to from an early age to know this is something I'm really passionate about.
I still do a lot with the Baroque music stuff. So I'd say, my favorite concerts that I remember are on two poles. One is playing with Led Zeppelin on the modern cello, which was great. I was, in the backup orchestra, but it was in Boston.
Really interesting.
With these amazing violinists and his Egyptian all-star group, and they're amazing. It was incredible. And there was we were in the brand new basketball stadium there that had just been built, 40,000 seat packed place that had never been used before. So it was pretty exciting. And then I also, on the other hand of that, played with Dunedin Concert, which is Scotland has, in my opinion, one of the best early music ensembles in the world is right here. And that's Dunedin Concert with John Butt. And no, I'm not getting paid for that. I haven't played with them, sadly, for quite some time, but I used to play with them. And when I first moved over here, and I played the St. Matthew Passion right across the street from me at Queen's Hall. And that was also a real highlight for me of my musical career.
Wow. So you've went from these, wonderful highlights, as you've said, playing with some fantastic musicians.
Yes.
How did you end up going from that into becoming a certified music practitioner? How does one make that jump? Tell us a little bit what CMP means and how you ended up down that road.
Yeah, that was one of the things I can say about myself is I'm always wanting to learn, and I'm always curious. Curiosity is a big part of who I am. And I noticed as I was growing older, people that I knew as high school friends and things, sadly, their parents who I'd been very close to, people were dying. People start dying as you get older. And I had, as a high school student, when I was in Berkeley, California, because by then I'd moved to Berkeley, California, another rebel area of the United States. And I had played often the cello in the living room of friends of mine and for their parents. And it would just be fun. A lot of people I knew were musicians, and we would play, and, it was all very casual, but fun. So when these parents started to get sick, that was my natural thing, was to go and play the cello, because that was what I knew what to do. But what I found was I was playing the cello, and when in doubt, when you play solo cello, you play the solo box suites. And people that are listening may not be music lovers or classical lovers, I can almost promise you that they've heard something of the Bach suites somewhere, and that they would love them if they heard some of it, because it's something about them are incredibly important and special. So I do that, and I've had the honor and privilege, as I say, to play at the bedside of some of my, beloved friends' parents dying. And my grandfather, who was in a horrible nursing home for 6 or 7 years when I was young, and I would go in and play the swan for him because he loved when I did that. And he was, now I know he had quite late dementia. He didn't know anything about that back in the 70s, 80s. You didn't know. And he would come to life when I would play for him. And I always remembered that. So I knew when I played at the bedside that there was something else going on. What I knew, I also took care of a man during some of this time who was, he had AIDS. I was a respite carer for him. And he wasn't interested in my classical playing at all. Like, that wasn't part of our relationship, and that was fine. But he said to me all the way through me taking care of him that when he got really sick, he wanted me to play for him. He said, "Will you play for me?" And I kind of gulped and I said, "Sure." So I did, and I played for him right before he died. I was the last person to see him before he died. And I knew when I did those things that what I knew was that I was doing something really important. I knew it wasn't a show or entertainment, and I knew I wasn't quite doing the right thing. I mean, like, it was fine what I was doing, but I didn't really feel like I was doing what I could be doing with music. But it opened my eyes to music being something completely different. So along my kind of way, I started a few community Baroque orchestras, one in England and one in the US. And when the US one, through someone there, was the last of the people to tell me of 3 different people who I didn't know well. I mean, I know their names. I'd be like in a queue with them for something, and we'd start talking. And somehow this program came up, MHTP, Music and Transition, Music for Healing and Transition Program. I always get that. It's always not easy off my mouth. But I kept hearing about it, and I kept thinking, oh, but it's just for harp players. That's what I thought. Then I found out it wasn't just for harp players. And I took this course. Now, it's not over here in the UK, sadly. But in the US, they've worked really hard to make this something that is certified. And the difference is now there's music therapists, and some people listening will have heard of music therapists by now. They're really only not that long they've been around, really. But it is literally therapy. It is literally, they get trained intensively. They go through numbers of years. It's like, you could think of it as talk therapy, only it's using music as the kind of the container or the method for the therapy. So that's intensive training, very intensive. This was a great compromise, and it was what I was more interested in, where I did 5 modules, I did 40 hours of intensive being in a hospital, playing over a long period of time and keeping notes. That was sort of part of my training that I had. And then you become certified, and it's recognized in the US. And they're playing, certified music practitioners now in the US are playing and getting paid hospitals, hospices, nursing homes, care homes, private homes, all over. And what I learned there were a lot of the tools that actually music therapists learn, but the big difference was and is that music therapists go in like a therapist does, where you have somebody comes in and says, I'm depressed. Can we work? I have a mental issue to work on. With this, you certainly don't want to cause harm. That's always, obviously that's true. But what I go in is I meet somebody in the moment where they are. And I don't have an agenda, particularly in terms of where that's going to go. I don't have a goal in sight. I have using the music as a conduit for communication and connection with that person. And when I moved to Scotland, which was in 2007, and then partner, I wanted to keep doing this work because I'd been trained. I was working in hospices, and it was very meaningful. And I also went to a Buddhist, by the way, amazing program when I was in the US that was for being at the bedside of people when they were dying, because that end of life was particularly important to me, because I really learned that that was a time, things are powerful at that time, very powerful and real. And it's very different than any other time of someone's life and the family's life and the people that are surrounding it. And I knew music had something really powerful to do there, but I didn't quite know what it was. And the Buddhist, that was a wonderful thing about walking in, that when you walk across the threshold of a room, you're walking into another space, you're walking into their space. So I moved here, could not find anything where I could do the work I do because it's not recognized in the UK. Was a little put out by that, as you might imagine. And my then partner said, oh, but I found this other thing, and that was the enhanced palliative care course.
Oh, okay.
It's such a, it was at Stirling. I had no idea where Stirling was. I was living in St. Andrews, so it's 2 hours away a car or longer by bus. And it also was, it changed its name. That was kind of, there was a window of maybe 2 years that it was called a course for enhanced palliative care. It would have never even crossed my path otherwise, because it became even something much more nurse orientated. Because everybody else in the class they were nurses, Macmillan nurses, working with, all sorts of different types of medical issues, and me, the usual outlier. So
it's really interesting.
Couldn't stand hearing about some of the stuff they did. So yeah, and that took me, I did that course because I was interested, because again, I was curious. And I thought, well, I'd never written an essay in my life. I come from the US, we don't do that. And the state schools don't do that. So I learned how to write essays. That was the first big triumph. And I was interested, I was reading all these articles about how music, because I would always slip music in. I would always get the angle in. That wasn't part of it wasn't a music thing at all. But the first one was about how do you, one was what is a good death? Another one was, which is, I'll tell you, go work on that for a semester. It'll,
Jeez, okay.
It's a very complicated question.
Yeah.
And it haunts you actually after a while, but also, about communication at the bedside in palliative care. And I was fascinated, how that could apply to music. Well, what happens when I have music into the mix with palliative care or into palliative care? And from that, my last tutor that I had there for the last module before we were to do our dissertation, because it was distance learning, which now everybody's doing. And the last module I took was on dementia and palliative care, and I knew nothing about dementia, nothing. So I never, that I knew of, met anybody with dementia. The care home world, first of all, during COVID has been really isolated and insulated, and we know that. So families aren't getting to connect physically with their loved ones. Loved ones are suddenly without that contact, and they may or may not understand why. And even if they do understand why, there's going to be a lot that's very upsetting, and it happened quite suddenly. So with that in mind, this could be all the time, though, is a need, which is that this is an outside person who can be reached on a phone, either by a care home resident or for families that are outside of the care home, where they can just kind of be listened to about their fears, their being upset, concerns they might have, frustrations they're having, that they might not say to each other within the family unit, but they can say to somebody who's just going to listen. It's not a counseling service. It's not an advice line. It's a listening service, which takes a skill of its own, which Iain is showing in spades today. So the other part that's unique to this is it's because it's through the Edinburgh Interfaith Association, is that there are no chaplains or anything within. There are in hospitals, but not in care homes. So it's not for any specific faith. It's for all faiths and none, and we've tried to make that very clear. So if you're a complete atheist, you're welcome. This is not a time where somebody's going to be trying to proselytize to you or to get you to convert to something or go to some place. But it is about, if you have a certain faith-based history and you want to talk to somebody, we can get you to somebody that has that background. And some of the faiths, you know, are not that easily accessed, and certainly not in a care home. You know, and especially if it's end of life issues, the family may want to talk to somebody. You know, this is a real need. And sometimes people, by the way, in care homes that have dementia may go back to a religion or a faith base that they haven't dealt with for, you know, decades and decades and decades, and suddenly find that they need that connection. So it's there for the taking, and we're all, you know, ready to receive calls and to be able to be of service, basically.
Yeah, and with all the deaths that are fortunately taking place during care homes, COVID-19 is a really important service that you're providing. So people can find out details on the Edinburgh Interfaith Association website, but we will put a link on the Facebook and to go with this programme, so if people are interested or know people who might want to access the service, that they can. So just a couple of questions before we finish. And finally, do you have any final message for people watching just before we end?
That's, I guess that, you know, we're in a dark time in the world, I would say. I have to say, being both a US and UK citizen right now. And I know that we'll get through it and we'll get to another side. And, you know, the more we can figure out ways to connect, connection and community are what it's going to be about. And so the more we can figure out ways, simple tools to do that, the better we're all going to be, you know. So I think that's what I would say.
Great. Well, Claire Garabedian, thank you very much for being our guest today. And
thank you so much.
Hope to see you performing very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.